Okay, so I have put the entire meeting on recording. We can begin with our discussion now. So I can see only one student right now, Navya. So Navya, do you have any question? You can unmute yourself and ask. Am I audible, both of you?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, so let's go ahead with our discussion. You can ask a question. See, this tutorial was primarily meant for any clarification or question if you have, right? So important if we yeah. So please take your time and ask your question if any. All right. So it looks like there is no specific concern from any one of you. Let me repeat once again that this is a session where if you have any question, if you have any queries related to whatever we have done so far, you've got to ask any question if you have. Yeah, you can unmute yourself and ask a question. No question. Okay. So let me then go to the questions that have been asked by those who have not been able to attend. And for that, let me, okay, go to those questions. All right. So, okay. So the first question that we had was a brief mention of the activities that we conducted, that were conducted in the class. Okay. So that's very interesting. In fact, topic one had many such, in fact, all the topics have had many such activities overall. So the first topic, if you recall, had the activity that began with on word association test, WAT. We also had an activity on the QSOT technique, right? The details, of course, you must be having in your notes, but I'm just recounting all those activities that were done. Providing details of that would be extremely difficult. That would require hours of time. So WAT1, where we had gone into set of words, and we had to respond to that and see that what kind of complexes we could understand from there. We had some clue regarding that, some examples from the class. Okay. And then we also had an activity on few sort technique that were associated with, as you know, real self and self-concept. Then for topic 2, we had the activity going on regarding the discursive framework. And discursive framework is something that we had learned from the activity where we began with our uh, where we began with our own sharing. First of all, writing about our own meanings of happiness, and then sharing that with um, other students, other student, within a group of 2. And then from there, we had derived certain aspects of what happens when we try to um, write down, for ourselves certain ideas regarding our own experiences, and what really happens when we start sharing that. What are the parameters of human communication that we can derive from there? So that was something that was part of that activity, and we could derive 4 basic elements of discursive framework from there. The first one was about ideas about experiences being not as concrete as we usually take it to be. And there were some concrete examples, if you recall from that activity. And then from there on, the purposiveness of any kind of talk, right? So talk having this purpose of initiating or regulating some social action rather than simply representing the discourse independent reality. So that was the second one. And then first and second took us towards the third one, which basically meant that reality is socially constructed. And then finally, dynamic partnership, where the last part of activity was very important, where we could see that what we really felt when our partner was, and that was also part of, another exercise that I'll be talking about later. But this particular element, that how close one could get to the participants' experiences of happiness, and then from there on, what it does to the partner. So these were some of the things that were a part of the activity on discursive framework. Then we went into the activity on something that we learned as social identity theory, where the in-group and out-group bias could be understood with the help of simple exercise on trying to write about our own countrymen and the citizens of any other neighboring country. From there on, we had the activity on BDI, Big Depression Inventory, and we could see that how we could try and make sense of this particular screening tool for major depressive disorder. Professor Beck's contribution there. And before that, we had also gone into another activity on listening, right, and how it may contribute to the process of counseling. So these have been some of the activities that we have done. Any question related to that, if you have? Anybody? Okay. So question number 2, from where do we read about major depressive disorder that we're taught in the class? Okay, I told you that what was provided in the slides and the menu, we had to note it down, as I've been telling the people, that whatever is there on the slides, to try and note it down. And it basically came from Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Now, the manual is something huge. So what was given to you in the slides was nothing but the summary of it. Okay, so if you could not attend that class, it's important that you try to talk to your friends and see that what notes that they had taken about the symptoms of not just major depressive disorder, but other ones too, anxiety. Then we also had obsessive compulsive disorder, manic episode, major depressive disorder, schizophrenia. Okay, and then what parts of clinical psychology reading material are not coming? Okay, so I rechecked it, and everything that has been shared with all of us is has to be covered, right? So nothing has to be left out because if you look at topic 4, which tells us something about clinical psychology that deals with human well-being or mental health issues. All the readings are associated with all the subtopics, beginning with normality and abnormality to, in fact, even before that, the whole process of listening in counseling, although that's a part of topic 3, but then obviously very important also topic 4. And then from there on, we also had this, this entire segment on what is the very nature of counseling or psychotherapy, different kind of expectancies. And then finally, we also had covered different types of therapies or counseling. So what is not coming is not the question, because everything that we had done in the class comes from those readings. So please try to go through that. And as I've been repeatedly saying, that what you took down as your notes in the class from questions, from discussions regarding the concepts that were shown on the slides, that's going to be very, very important. So we tend to go slow. We tend to go into questions also many a time, after covering the concept. So that's going to be important. Okay, then number 4, could you summarize the important parts of Jackson's speech? Okay, so one broad suggestion once again is to get back to the notes. Let me quickly tell you what all were important in those notes. Jesse Jackson's, it began with the whole appeal regarding, okay. If you have any question, Abhay, please ask. I don't think it's a good time to edit the Google Doc. If you have any question, Abhay? Okay. So please don't edit anything right now. Okay. So, all right. So Jesse Jackson's thing began with creative maladjustment, the call for creative maladjustment. So how do we understand that? And what is the significance of that, as far as the different aspects of human social issues are concerned? So that's what we went into. And one of the major issues that Jackson attracts our attention towards is prejudice and discrimination, which may have no basis actually. And we create those bases because of our tendencies towards in-group positive and out-group negative biases, about which we had the activity. Okay. And also because of the stereotypes that we have. So that's something that comes from Jesse Jackson, the concern about creative maladjustment. There are numerous examples regarding creative maladjustment and how to foster that and why to foster that, right, has been given in that article. So please, look at that article from that point of view. Then May's contribution was primarily about social justice agenda, how we are born into different kinds of social hierarchies. And why is it important to embrace that rather than to just simply go by, the so-called scientific understanding that may itself be guided by the dominant Euro-American assumptions. So that's why she talks about the importance of external validity rather than just the internal one. External validity would mean that how the realities or views of people are going to be very, very important rather than what are taken to be, the picture, the representation of reality with the help of concepts that are derived not from that culture, but from, let's say, some other Euro-American culture. So that was the concern of Vicky Mays. And then finally, okay, so next one is what conclusions are we supposed to make out of identity politics material, study material? Okay, so identity politics study material was there for 2 reasons. One, to look at the whole history of psychology in terms of how in the beginning it was marked by the effort towards um, effort towards understanding the history, as I've already said. And then secondly, what were the problems with uh, the so-called scientific understanding of human realities, and because of which we could see that there were some insights, and there also were certain kinds of questions that started coming up. And that's where we find that uh, started to contribute. Now, practically, we had to study only a few pages from that article. Okay, so let me go to that email that I had sent you. Topic 2. Yeah. So from that identity politics article by Samson, we simply had to go through pages 1219 to 1222, and then also the section on dialogic partnership. So that was something that we were supposed to do. And as I told you in the beginning of this article, the important thing was to try and understand various collective movements and what they represented, what kind of discontent that those collective movements represented, and what was the alternative for that. And that's where we could see that the important understanding regarding the discursive framework about which we did our activity based on the exercise on happiness, where two of us not only wrote down our own experiences of happiness, but also tried to share that. And from there, we could derive 4 basic elements of the discursive framework. So question number 5, which is about what do we make out of identity politics study material? What you got to do is to relate that to the discursive framework activity, because those page numbers 1219 to 1222 is all about discursive framework, as well as the collective movements of 1960s that were indicative of the misrepresentations of people's identities, the women, the African Americans, third world country people, and the so-called sexually deviant people. So that is something that we got to make out of identity politics study material. And then number 6, how to stop confusion between negative reinforcement, negative punishment, how to avoid confusion in operant conditioning. I think we had a full class devoted to that. Let me repeat. What you got to do is get back to the very definition of operant conditioning itself. And the definition tells us that the person operates, the individual operates on the environment to get certain kinds of consequences where one is able to avoid unpleasant experiences as a, consequence. And also one is able to maximize, one is able to gain the pleasant consequences. So let's never forget that the operant conditioning principle is all about the individual's concern, individual's behavior or response that would lead to a consequence that is to avoid any kind of painful experience and to gain pleasant experiences. So that is the mandate of operant conditioning. Now, if the individual is operating on the environment, okay, for example, let's say the person starts reading, okay. Now, one clearly knows that if one reads, if one studies well, then certain kinds of consequences are promised, right? So what happens is that from the past, the person knows that whenever one has been able to study, there has been likelihood of either avoiding certain kinds of painful experiences or gaining pleasant experiences. So what happens that if one studies in order to avoid certain kinds of unpleasant consequences, unpleasant experience, like what? like certain restrictions, like certain kinds of restrictions on time, certain kinds of restrictions on, going out, uh, on doing certain activities which the person likes, but those were restricted because of certain untoward behavior from the on the part of the individual. So now the parents of that individual see that yes, the person has been studying, so let us reduce that, or let us minimize, let us remove that unpleasant experience as a consequence of his positive behavior, which is that of studying well or performing well. So negative reinforcement is all about that. The question that has been asked here, that it is all about trying to once again uh, have a pleasant consequence by avoiding negative, or by minimizing negative or painful experiences, right? So if I study well, I know that there would be a pleasant consequence. How? By removing those things which were unpleasant. And that is the meaning of negative reinforcement. Please understand that a person is studying well, right? And that particular study is further, I would say, increased by a pleasant consequence. And how does the pleasant consequence come? It comes by minimizing of or removal of the painful experience, which is that of any kind of restrictions. Okay, and then negative punishment again. Uh, what happens here is that um, a person had not been, let us say, doing certain things as per the expectations or desirable, let's say, behavior, and the person knows that if one stops that, if one stops behaving like that, right, there would be, uh, this kind of, uh, consequence, which would be, which would help him or her, avoid that. So what happens here is that whenever the person is, might have been in the habit of doing wrong things, right, and and one knows that there is going to be some kind of unpleasant consequence. That's for sure. So it becomes very important that whenever that unpleasant consequence comes, right, that makes the individual behave in a manner that um, punishment is avoided, and in order to avoid that punishment, the person stops behaving like that, right? So please compare this with negative reinforcement. What was happening in negative reinforcement was the person was studying well and knowing fully well that that would lead to certain kinds of removal of the restrictions. Now here what's happening is that person has not been, let us say, studying well, right? And what is happening here is that one has to stop this habit of not studying well, or maybe doing certain wrong things. Okay. And in order to, why does he do that? Because unless he stops that, there would be some kind of negative or unpleasant consequence in the form of what? Certain things may be removed from his or her immediate environment. Maybe the mobile phones, the laptops, certain kinds of freedom that was given to the person. So all those things are restricted. That is, in a way, removing something which was likable by the person, right? And in fact, and that's what leads to this realization that if I do not stop, behaving in certain undesirable manner, this punishment would continue, right? So that's what happens, that the next time, after the punishment has been given, next time what happens is that whenever the person behaves in that manner, one is reminded of the consequence. And that's why you find that that negative habit, or that untoward, undesirable habit gets stopped because of this punishment thing. So please look at both the examples. What was happening here was that in negative reinforcement, the person was operating on the environment to get certain kinds of pleasant consequences by having certain negative certain unpleasant consequences removed. And here what's happening in case of negative punishment, the person was not behaving in a in a desirable manner, and he had to stop, that undesirable behavior because of the punishment. And what is this punishment like? It is a punishment where certain things have been removed from the immediate environment, right? So these are the things which are conceptually very important for us to look into. So that's question number 6. Now moving on to number 7. Record the discussion as well. It would be really helpful to listen to you summarize the activities before the exam. So that we have already done. Question number 1. Okay, and can get back to that. Now, that was just the summary, of course. You would need the details of that because, for example, I have simply summarized discursive framework or WAT activity or the activity of listening and counseling. What you got to do is that you got to get back to those notes, those flowcharts, and how we could derive certain understanding from those activities, right? So, yeah, so some pointers have been given there that how listening may be obtruded by. In that activity, we could see, certain kinds of tendencies towards advice, towards expertise. And besides that, we also had several other obtruding factors like the person's motivation to care, whether it is there or not. We also had, another important thing that was all about the, ways in which the person may himself or herself going through certain kinds of preoccupations or conflicts, and then finally the aspiration for authority. Now, all these things are important to be elaborated upon, with some examples. And partly, at least the advice giving was something that could also be evident from that activity. So what I have done as a response to your question number 1 is to go into all those activities, try to summarize that, but that might not be good enough. You got to get back to the notes, talk to your friends if you could not note it down, and look at the examples that help us understand the concept better. Okay. So, for example, we also had this response of the speaker towards all the 3 listeners, remember from that listening exercise, and how those responses were taken, let us say, and what was the impact of that on the person? The person was, the person felt like speaking more. That was one indication of feeling safe, having trust, all those things that we had understood from that topic of listening and counseling. So get back to those insights that we had developed, get back to the concepts. Okay, so then finally, number 8, please explain the details and implications of the activity conducted just after the quiz. Just after the quiz, we had the couple of activities where we had gone into, VDI was one. Before VDI, we had this listening and counseling thing. We also had another activity where we looked at the important narratives that we have in our lives, certain songs, poems, or stories, anecdotes, which help us address some of the challenging times in our lives. And the idea was to look at how we still remember one of the students talking about the values that may guide us in some of the difficult times in our lives because of loss, because of certain difficulties with our near and dear ones, and how those values may come up as an important element. And that could be associated with our real self to some extent, what defines us, right? Now, similarly, all those stories that could not be shared but must be there with many of students. But how do those indicate certain elements in various aspects of counseling, various types of counseling, rather? So there must be some stories. Remember, I also mentioned in the class certain kinds of, songs or stories, poems that could be associated with, let's say, the defense mechanisms, right? that could also be associated with certain healthy options, which we see within the cognitive behavioral approach, right? So when we say that there are certain kinds of faulty assumptions, faulty ways of thinking that are leading us towards emotional disturbances, or Beck would call that depression, for example, how we can try to change that with the help of more optimistic and positive alternative thoughts. And that's exactly where you will find that some of the stories, some of the anecdotes, some of the poems may be very, very, I would say, relatable for many of us to try and find some healthy or optimistic alternatives. So this is what we had done as far as these three activities after the quiz was concerned. But you should not just be, preparing only for those activities which were done after the quiz. You should also take, into account other activities. You should also go through the discussions, the notes that you have taken from the other activities before the quiz also. Okay. So I think I'm through. And if you have any other question, then you can ask now. Yes. Okay, so I'll pause the recording whenever.
Tell the difference between if you could tell the difference between listening and counseling. So
Listening and counseling. So, could you go through the text?
yes,
Okay, so what do you find there? Do you find some mention of number one? What is the very definition of listening? How do we define that? Right from hearing
yes,
to, yeah, to attending, to understanding, and then recalling, right? And in this entire process, what happens is that attending becomes very, very critical. Only then you are able to understand and recall. And what comes in the way of attending is certain obtruding factors, right? So there are, three major ones that have been given there: inadequate motivation to care. Then you also have the aspiration for authority or persons or the counselor's own conflicts or preoccupations. So these are the obtruding factors which have to be minimized. And how do we minimize that? With the help of similar activity that we had done in the class. Now we try to listen to others and try and see that in what ways proper listening is happening or not. Right? If we are not able to listen, we are not actually able to provide the uh, feedback, which is known as reflecting back. And if proper reflecting back is not happening, then the speaker would let you know that no, it's not happening. And then one tries to find out that what are the things that are not helping me, whether it is certain preoccupations, whether I'm really adequately motivated to care or not, right? That's another one. In fact, four major obtruding factors: inadequate motivation to care. Then you also have own conflicts or problems. Then you also have the aspiration for authority, right? So all these important things, if one is able to take care of, then one moves towards proper understanding with the help of listening. Understanding is a part of it, then recalling also, and then one is able to um, provide the feedback. That's also taken to be reflected back, and that's where it's also known as all these ways of trying to deal with obtruding factors with the help of reflections. That's also known as, according to the text, suspending one's ego. So, what is suspending one's ego? It's nothing but trying to deal with my inadequate motivation to care, or my own conflicts, or my aspiration for authority, right? Certain preoccupations, that I would be having. So, all these factors become important to be suspended for the time being, and that helps us listen better. Once one is able to take care of all these obtruding factors, one is able to reflect back properly. And once that is listened to by the speaker, by the client, one feels more comfortable, and builds the trust on the counselor. And therefore, listening is so critical. Therefore, listening and reflecting back is so critical. But that helps you build a bridge between the experiences of counselor and the client. And the client develops trust. And once the trust develops, you find that the real exploration begins from there, in exploration of the person's experiences, conditions that are giving rise to that, and then finally certain possible choices that are there for the person. These are explored. So that, in a nutshell, was the entire topic of listening and counseling. And the text tells us about that also. Yeah, and we also had a flowchart, that we had noted down that helps us summarize the entire whatever I've spoken so far. You find that there.
And so one more thing, like in that listening and counseling text, there was a term poised attention. And it was defined like not knowing where very clearly what he she might find, but having a good idea where to look. So like could you provide an example of this?
Oh, come again. What is the last part there?
Not knowing very clearly what he she might find, but having a good idea where to look.
Where to look?
Poise attention.
Okay. So again, it's an important part of the exploration itself. See, for example, a person who is, let us say, as per the learning that we had from cognitive behavioral approach, right? So all those important uh, understanding regarding faulty assumptions that Beck could develop with the help of his associates told us something about that we do not know. You and I do not know what the person's faulty assumptions might be, right? But how do we try to make sense of it? What kind of exploration would help us? So it would be with the help of certain kinds of, let us say, reality check. So that's the meaning of trying to, say that where to look for that, right? So I hope you get that point, that the direction that exploration would take would be in line with where certain kinds of or what direction the exploration should be taken, in the sense that where we can try to find certain sources of these difficult life experiences or emotional disturbances, and that direction, according to Beck, would be in terms of those faulty assumptions, which have to be explored and explored. If you recall, let's say, arbitrary inference, right? Do you recall that as one of the faulty assumptions?
Yes.
Yeah, and remember in the class, we had also noticed that we try to check with the client that, okay, you say that that person is upset with me, right? One simple thing for exploration of this kind, or for example, where to look for, the possible understanding is to try and check, with the client that, in last 1 week, how many times have we talked to the person when we claim that, yes, that person is means in current times, right now is upset with. So it's quite possible, that the person realizes that, oh my goodness, no, I haven't. Maybe for last 1 month, I have not checked, I've not. But I assume that, okay, what might have happened some months ago might still be happening right now, in terms of he or she being upset with me. So we do not necessarily know, for example, that what kind of all the assumptions, arbitrary inference, overgeneralization, if you recall, was another one. Then magnification and minimization was another one, right? And then we also had something called the dichotomous reasoning. So the idea is to try and see that what could be, as per, let us say, the cognitive behavioral approach, as an example of, where we tend to locate, the possible sources of issues, right? we try to move into these thinking processes, that what the person is thinking right now regarding the incident, regarding the person, regarding the event, right? So that helps us find a direction towards what we are trying to, in what ways rather, the facilitating of the client's issues, conditions, as the sources of those issues can take place. I hope you get your answer, Madhav.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So still have some time. Okay. So please take your time and ask any question if you have. In the meantime, let me tell you, as announced in the class, there will be this seating plan that we got to follow for this midsem that's going to happen tomorrow. And I mean, as told you earlier, all the things that we have done so far, which is the concepts of topics until topic 4, the end of topic 4. So all of it has to be studied, and that's the part of our syllabus, as already announced in the class. So please be careful. The key thing is going to be the notes that you take, from the class, because these are not just about what you have in the text, but also various activities that we have done to simplify the text as much as possible. And so that's how it has been, right? So please take your time and ask any question if you have.